El rugido de los aficionados, el ritmo de las porras, la intensidad en la cancha. Esto es más que solo un partido de fútbol. Con DraftKings Sportsbook, esta es tu oportunidad de convertir cada jugada en una gran ganancia. Descarga la app de DraftKings Sportsbook y usa el código HEART. Ese es el código HEART para que los nuevos usuarios reciban $200 en bonus bets al instante cuando apuestes solo $5. En asociación con DraftKings, la corona es tuya. ¿Problemas con el juego? Llama al 1-800-GAMBLER. En Nueva York, llama al 877-8-HOPE-NY o envía un mensaje de texto con la palabra HOPE-NY al 467-369. En Connecticut, hay ayuda disponible para problemas con el juego. Llama al 888-789-7777 o visita ccpg.org. Juega responsablemente. En nombre de Boot Hill Casino Resort, Kansas. Debe ser mayor de 21 años. La elegibilidad varía según la jurisdicción. No válido en Ontario. Pueden aplicarse cargos en Illinois. Las apuestas de bonos son de un solo uso. La apuesta no se incluye en las ganancias y caducan después de ser otorgadas. La oferta finaliza el 29 de septiembre 2025 a las 11:59 p.m. hora del este. Los términos en DraftKings.com/sportsbook/promos.
Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. I think there's a lot to talk about today. If you're not in the UK and you are kind of even curious, vaguely, passively curious about what is happening with British politics at the moment, the only way to kind of really summarise the truly interesting thing that's happening is that there is a formation of a new left underway in Great Britain. Okay, this sounds like the sorts of things that people on the left tend to say, and it sounds like the kind of wishful thinking that those of us on the left tend to kind of engage in, but it's nonetheless true, and I'll talk you through it. Okay, so as you no doubt know, the kind of epicenter of British politics has moved inexorably to the right for the past 40 years. The Labour Party in Great Britain has done a kind of a version of what the Democrats in America did and essentially surrendered to neoliberalism. The Democrats in America looked at Reaganism and they found it kind of largely irresistible. They said to themselves, you know, there's no way you can you can conceive of this is such a hegemonic project. There's no way you can stand against it. And in fairness to them, the various attempts to do so, to present a kind of an alternative to Reaganism, which was a kind of essentially a reworking of the New Deal in the 1980s, was soundly rejected at the ballot box. The thing about Reaganism and Thatcherism in the 1980s was that both of them had a large and kind of well-funded New Deal state in the USA and a welfare state in Great Britain, along with nationalised utilities, to sell off and eviscerate and kind of burn, basically. And so for at least at the time, for perhaps a decade afterwards, it appeared as if the abundance or some kind of prosperity had been created, and it's like, well, no, you've just sold off state assets cheaply, and there's been a certain segment of society that have benefited. But the problem with that is you only get to do it once. So the electoral successes of Clinton in America and in the mid 1990s, Tony Blair in Great Britain, were really, I mean, in many ways, the products of far more attractive economic circumstances. We're at a kind of stage of globalization where the prospects for centre-right parties were significantly better. Gary Gersel, when he writes about the Democrats in America, he said they kind of enraged the Republicans because they took the Republican economic agenda and they kind of infused it with a kind of a liberal veneer of kind of cosmopolitanism and what Republicans viewed as this kind of moral relativism around sort of gender and sexual morality and that sort of thing. And if you look at the kind of the world of personal choice that the neoliberals argue that their economics brings, that's the bit that kind of conservatives with big C's and small C's tend to hate. They want the massive inequality and greed, but when it comes to leaving people free to choose their own beliefs and their own ideas around gender and sexuality, or to have a kind of an ever more diverse society due to labor forces moving around, they don't like that so much. Anyway, I digress. So the Labour Party, from the early 1980s really onwards, was on a kind of a rightward move. The defeat of Michael Foot in 1983, the 1983 general election, Michael Foot before Jeremy Corbyn, the last socialist leader of the Labour Party, saw the arrival in office of Neil Kinnock, seen as a kind of pragmatist, troubleshooting figure who threw out of the party the kind of the entryist left. And in the guise of militant tendency, who was a Trotskyite party that believed that you could infiltrate a centrist democratic party like the Labour Party and steer it towards the left. So Kinnock was remarkably kind of uncommitted when it came to the great struggle of the 1980s, the miners' strike, and wouldn't be drawn on his support for the miners. And then when the 1992 general election was lost, Labour lose in 83, in 87, in 1992, and then they win again in 1997. 92 is lost, and Kinnock goes and is replaced by John Smith, who sadly dies in 94, and shortly after that, Blair becomes leader of the party. The party at that point, it's not that it had moved necessarily to the right; it's that the right of the party had always been there. James Callaghan in the 1970s had been in kind of economically and socially and culturally embracing many of the ideas of Thatcherism long before Thatcherism came about. Bernard Donahue, I think it was, one of the chief advisors to Callaghan, said after the election that they should in 79 that they should have gone with the offering the sale of council houses to council tenants. They said, well, that would probably have won us the election in 79. When Callaghan and Healey accepted an IMF bailout loan, quite unnecessarily by many, from many perspectives, in 1976, they had to essentially embrace the kinds of structural adjustment programs that were inflicted on the global south during the 1970s and 80s. Um, and so, and the acceptance of structural adjustment programs from neoliberal organizations like the IMF meant that it was a way of gradually importing neoliberalism into social democratic Great Britain. And the fact that there are elements in the Labour Party, indeed Callaghan and Healey at the time, that were intensely relaxed about this, that said that, the party had to be grown up about it and accept that, nobody was providing a free lunch anymore. Really gives you clues about their thinking. And Callaghan was elected in the 1945 general election. So there were right elements in the Labour Party. Not saying he hadn't been on a journey rightwards, he probably had, but there were right elements in the Labour Party right from the get-go. And from 1945 and prior to that. So the Labour Party has always had this kind of element of reaction in it. But the events of the early 21st century have turned those into kind of overdrive. So if you look at the crises of the early 20th century, 21st century, from the post 9/11 atmosphere through to Iraq, through to the financial crisis, and up to 2016, when in 2015, when Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party, and then in 2016 when Brexit happened, the managerial class in Great Britain, who are best represented by the Labour Party normally, but the kind of the professional managerial class of top civil servants and lawyers and kind of white collar workers was thrown into crisis. Their world had been torn apart. The kind of Citizen Smith parody lefty from the 1970s, the sorts of person who went kind of on protests for Nicaragua in the 1970s, Jeremy Corbyn, they're absolute kind of bête noire. Not because, many of these, the people that oppose Jeremy Corbyn instinctively don't vote Tory. They see the Tories as kind of a party of unspeakable cruelty. Though they are more than happy to endorse these sorts of policies when a Labour Party comes up with them, because that's the sensible grown-up thing to do. But many of the people that opposed and undermined Jeremy Corbyn in the media and within the party believe that they were doing it in the defence of Labour Party principles. And the Labour Party in the 1930s strongly rejected the Independent Labour Party, the National Unemployed Workers Movement, because the NUWM had connections with the Communist Party, and they believed that they were, an anti-Bolshevik, anti-left, anti-communist party. And they believed that there was looking at the horrors of the Soviet Union, which some Fabians had a bit of a mooch around and decided was rather nice. They believed that there was a good moral reason for that, and you could be there's eminently a case to be made for that an anti-Stalinist party is an entirely kind of morally viable thing. But the professional managerial class in the 21st century that we're talking about, that isn't really engaged in any of those sorts of debates and doesn't even have that kind of historical memory, saw the election of Jeremy Corbyn, which was really a kind of his rise was a part of a mass movement against austerity. They reacted to that with abject horror, and then the following year Brexit happened, and they all reacted to that with abject horror. And everything that happened all the way up to the deposing of Corbyn after after 2017 the gradual sort of destruction of the Corbyn project after 2017 and its undermining, was part of a wider initiative to return the professional managerial class and their political kind of wing, the Labour Party, and all this kind of centre ground of politics, from the Tories to Labour, to power. They viewed Corbyn and the Brexit movement, and chiefly personified by Farage, as essentially the same thing, and they viewed it as this kind of wild populism. I mean, of course, I think it's very difficult to make that argument, but that's a slightly different podcast. And so, 2019, the electoral defeat in 2019, which I don't want to relitigate here, but it was, in large part due to the actions of the right of the Labour Party deliberately undermining Corbyn. And Corbyn wasn't blameless at all, but it was the right of the Labour Party deliberately undermining him, which led to an electoral catastrophe in 2019. When Starmer is elected in 2020, that was the kind of the culmination of the return of this professional managerial class and their professional managerial centrist kind of politics. And that centrist technocratic kind of politics says basically, there are no further economic questions to answer. Markets run things. We are here to kind of technocratically manage the state, partly to get the state out of the way of markets, and the various meetings between Starmer and BlackRock and other private equity companies point to that as being a prime objective. But also to do what we can to help help with the kind of the fallout from the functioning of markets. And under Labour, under Blair, perhaps when there's a bit more money around, because obviously we're post-Brexit now and we're all poorer, part of the way in which the left was managed and the way in which social crises were managed was through some reasonably generous investments in social provision, and some and things like, for example, Sure Start, the scheme, which was widely hailed as a success, to help low-income and families to give their children essentially the best start in life through kind of a network of Sure Start centres, which are kind of like family centres. By the way, anyone that's involved in Sure Start, I've explained that very badly, and please, do correct me. Now, all we have is essentially a coercion of the working class, and a kind of almost kind of paramilitary policing of dissent and protest. We have one of the most unpopular governments ever. They're a year in, and they are so unpopular that they've ceded and are continuing to deliberately cede an enormous amount of ground to the far right and Nigel Farage and Reform. Okay, so that's where we're at. Everything has shifted to the right. The centre ground is now espousing the sorts of things that the British National Party, a fascist party of the 1970s, used to put in their leaflets. And that's no hyperbole. That's a statement of fact. So what? So where is the left? Well, the left didn't go anywhere. People with left-wing views didn't simply evaporate in like kind of some great Thanos snap. They're still here. They still think the same things. They still look at environmental crises and homelessness and Gaza and the obscene profits made by multinationals and CEOs and tax avoidance and every other terrible thing, which is the product of the neoliberal era, and think that is bad. The project of the Labour Party from 2019 or 2020 onwards was basically around one thing, and it was removing the left from the party permanently. The Blairite Labour Party had kind of tolerated the left. People like Tony Benn and Jeremy Corbyn had been kind of irrelevances within the Labour Party, kind of nuisances. People that had stuck their oar in on questions about Iraq, but they had never been kicked out, and they'd never been suspended. I mean, Corbyn had voted against the Labour Party whip.
Hey there, are you sitting down? Good, because Wayfair's end-of-season sale is here, and you can shop it from your couch. It's Wayfair's Labor Day clearance, and it's on now. Right now, you can score up to 70% off everything home at Wayfair, like up to 50% off outdoor furniture and decor, and up to 70% off area rugs. Plus, amazing doorbuster deals, and 24-hour surprise flash deals on Wayfair home finds in every style. And get it all with fast shipping on everything, right to your door. From furniture to faucets, this is your last chance of the season to score huge deals at Wayfair. Don't let the final days of summer pass you by without shopping these end-of-season savings. So don't wait. Like summer, these savings won't last. Head to wayfair.com today to score up to 70% off everything home. Celebrate your holiday weekend with can't-miss savings before they run out. Shop Wayfair's Labor Day clearance now through September 2nd at wayfair.com.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
I can't remember how many times, but it is, I think, perhaps even getting into three figures. It spent years voting against the Labour Party whip, but never really been kind of kicked out because people like Blair, again, viewed Jeremy Corbyn as an annoying irrelevance, but also sort of part of the Labour tradition. Blair, despite his many crimes, did view the Labour Party as being a broad church. Jeremy Corbyn attempted to view the Labour Party as a broad church, to his downfall, and he didn't realise how kind of highly partisan and motivated and vindictive the Labour right were. I mean, the great fear of the Labour right was that nobody would listen to them anymore. This was their kind of ultimate nightmare. And these are people that have spent their time since their PPE degrees in Oxford being listened to and liking being listened to. In fact, people are paying to listen to them. It's being listened to is kind of their job, and on a more existential level, their kind of reason for being. So the crisis that this plunged them into was huge. The British press, almost uniformly, including the liberal press of the Guardian and the Independent, allied with the right of the Labour Party and obviously the Tories to oppose the Corbyn project through fair means and mainly foul ones. I think the infected anti-Semitism crisis and staging staging resignations on live TV with pliant sort of establishment journalists like Laura Kuenssberg. The left has felt for at least 5 years that there was nowhere for them to go, and they've been out in the wilderness until the emergence of two events this summer. Firstly, the candidacy of Zach Polanski for the leadership of the Green Party. The Green Party, very much kind of, for the most part, a centrist party that tacks to the right when it kind of it is required to. That is a bit like the Liberal Democrats with bicycles, basically. Zach Polanski has today won the leadership of the Green Party with something like 85% of the votes cast on an explicit left populist platform of challenging the power of billionaires, standing up for workers' and migrants' rights, and associating the environmental crisis with the overall conditions of capitalism that we face in the 21st century. Having a class critique of environmentalism, which is huge and really, really important. And this is, thousands upon thousands of left voters have surged into the Green Party. The second phenomenon is that of Jeremy Corbyn and Zarah Sultana, a left Labour MP suspended by the kind of the hierarchy of the Labour Party, suspended by Starmer, who had resigned from the Labour Party, has now established. Well, the party hasn't even established itself yet, but a kind of phenomenon called Your Party has been opening. It's just simply at the moment an email mailing list, which has, at the last count, got something like about 800,000 interested people subscribing. These, of course, won't all translate into party members, but if you think that at its height, the Labour Party under Corbyn had something like 500,000 members, it's currently got under 200,000, and that will go lower. So 800,000 people expressing an interest in a new party. It goes beyond what political parties in the 21st century in Great Britain have ever achieved, and it's presenting the possibility not of a mass movement. Now, the really exciting thing for this is that Labour has always existed as the left's kind of catch and kill party. It's about absorbing radicalism and doing a little bit with it, you know, building houses during the 1940s and 50s and 60s, nationalisation, and these are the peak radicalism for the Labour Party, the establishment of the Open University. It's not to say the Labour Party hasn't done good things; it certainly has, but it's been there. It's been largely the way in which the British state has defanged the working class, and a mass party that is not constrained by the Labour Party any longer, that has or could have a working electoral alliance with a radical New Green Party. Well, when you put it like that, you can see the prospects for extraordinary change. And the Conservative Party, that has now simply ceded ground to the far right, and it's now its offspring, the Reform Party, which will eventually kill its parent, the Conservative Party, I think, will be dead within a decade. The far right has now kind of entered British electoral politics and is going to be a tough to defeat. But the only thing that I can imagine is that if there's a meaningful route that people can be presented with through to dealing with the crises of our times in the cost of living and the environment and war and racism and poverty and all the other stuff, that is no longer kind of capable of being stymied by either the Labour Party, then that's got a chance to break through with a significant chunk of the population and draw politics back towards the left. So the corollary of this is that Zach Polanski's win today, which is an amazing achievement, is perhaps the beginning of a leftward shift again in British politics, and the kind of the populist. I hate that word really, but the kind of non-technocratic, openly kind of emotive and dynamic approach that he's taking of naming the issues, naming the causes, and naming the solutions, and presenting that to the public in non-political class terms, and not mincing his words particularly. And he consciously says that the left can learn things from Farage, who presents a clear prescription for the country's ills, except it's one that is based in kind of falsehoods and misleading notions of kind of xenophobia and non-declared fossil fuel company interests that kind of seem to be pouring into the Reform Party. Polanski has openly said that the left can learn from Farage, and in a way he's right. And I think we're in for some really, really on the left, some really kind of interesting developments. But let's see. Anyway, I'll catch you on the next podcast. And in terms of interesting developments, the website is growing, developing. There's new stuff going on there, and interesting things. So check it out. Anyway, I'll speak to you soon. All the best. Bye-bye.
Now you can fly anywhere in the world and pay discount prices on your airline tickets. Book a flight today to London, Paris, Madrid, or anywhere else you want to go. And pay a lot less guaranteed. Call the International Travel Department right now at Low Cost Airlines.
800-215-5141. 800-215-5141. That's 800-215-5141.